everybody, welcome back to my channel, and I guess today we're going to do an author-ish writing type video because I've just been doing a lot of booktube stuff and not enough authortube stuff, so here we go. I had several different things that I really kind of wanted to do for this first video, but I think that it would behoove me to cover something very basic and sort of go from there. So today we're going to be covering basic story structure. There are a ton of other people who have done videos about this and books that will go deeper into how this all works and why it works and so on and so forth, but I just wanted to sort of put this out there as my version and see where it leads people. If you're stuck in your story and you don't know where to go from where you've already sort of started, structure can help you propel the story forward, even if it's not necessarily great the first time around. Hitting these certain points will at the very least drive the story to the end point, and then you can just go back and edit later. For this video, we're going to be talking about the Fictean curve or Freytag's pyramid. They have their differences, but for our purposes, they're the same thing. Some people will also use this to discuss a 5-act play, and pretty much that's kind of what it is. I will insert the graphic here. It's very boring, but I swear it helps. So as you can see, this kind of looks like a mountain or a pyramid or something like that, and they have a few major parts. So there's the setup, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the denouement, which is just a fancy word for the end. Setup is pretty easy to sort of understand. This also goes by the word exposition, but I don't like to use that for reasons I will get into possibly in another video. And the reason why it's flat, or going flat, is that this is where we figure out what the world is, who the characters are. It sets up all of our expectations as to what this world is and how it operates. And the story doesn't really go anywhere, so it's pretty flat. This setup is really important because it sets up our expectations for the rest of the novel, which is the reason why some people will choose to include prologues, because the prologue may better set up the expectations for the novel than the first chapter, because we're expected to have our expectations subverted later on in the novel. You can do pretty much anything that you want in this setup. It doesn't matter too much, but it is very important. You do need to pay attention to this, especially going back and editing and rewriting certain portions. The next part is the rising action, which, if I put in more graphics here, look a little bit different depending on what graph you use. You'll notice that some of these graphs have some more divots, ups and downs, but generally the points keep going up. And the reason why is because the points of the story are becoming more and more intense. The characters are more driven. The stakes become higher and higher and higher until finally we get to the climax. Now, before we get to that, the reason why some people prefer the ones with more divots and ups and downs is because the story should have ups and downs. It should have high points, it should have low points, it should have points of drama, it should have quieter moments. And this is essentially where your plot becomes relevant. These are the sections where there are complications to the story. There is something that gets in the way of your protagonist completing their mission, or somebody dies, or some new information is given that will change or alter your character's plans and actions. There can be any number of plot points and ups and downs and so forth. As long as you're progressively always going toward that final point, that final climax of the story, you're probably doing just fine. Now, the climax of the story is also pretty straightforward. It's that thing that your character has been trying to get to this entire time, whether it's the treasure that's guarded by the dragon, or they finally find out who done it and they have to figure out how to deal with the murderer. This is also usually a point of great action. So this is the speech that the general gives before going into battle. It's the final confrontation between our protagonist and our antagonist. It's the moment when our adventurer gets into the temple and sees, the golden idol that they're supposed to take, and they just have to figure out how to get to it. This should be also the point with the highest stakes. Either your character is in a life or death situation, or there are some number of consequences if they fail. These stakes could be as large as end of the world scenarios, or it could be as small and intense as personal gain or personal pride. Regardless, we should feel that this is the most important thing to this character that, we have seen so far. The falling action / denouement, they are different, but pretty much, as far as structure is concerned, they are the same. The falling action is everything that happens after the climax. So sometimes just defeating the big boss at the end of your game is not enough to complete the story. In the detective novel, there's the matter of getting paid by your shady employer. Or, you may have destroyed the one ring, but you have to go back to the Shire and tell Rosie Cotton how you feel. This is the part where you really wrap up your story. There might be 1 or 2 more action points, but typically it's much quieter than the rest of the story. Now, to sort of sum up all of these fancy terms and the pyramid and whatever into something that's a little bit easier to understand. If you're not sure about your story and if it's structurally sound, try to put it through this model. And we're going to tell a very simple story. Once upon a time, and every day, until one day, and then, until finally, the end. I was taught this in a script writing class, so it's a little bit more bent toward that. However, this works perfectly for almost any story. The once upon a time and everyday portions are your setup. It sets up the expectation of who these characters are and pretty much that they've lived normal lives. So to remember that, before you were born, the world existed and it will continue to exist long after you die. So you kind of have to put that into your world building. The next portion, until one day, is our inciting incident. It's actually something that I haven't talked about yet, which is essentially the reason why we're here. Why do we care about this character and their problems, in particular? Like, what happened this day that set in motion the rest of the story? This is your thesis of your entire story, and it's really important. So it really does get its own line. If you want to put it on the Fictean curve, it's this point right here. I'll put an arrow somewhere to point it out. It's when the story stops being a line and starts actually going somewhere into our rising action. Each of the and then portions, that is your rising action. You can have any number of and thens, but for our purposes, there are 3. Everything becomes more and more intense. Just remember that. Everything has to build up for the until finally portion of our story, which is the climax. In this model, until finally also sort of like brushes over the falling action, but the end should encompass your falling action denouement section. So that's basic structure. You can use this for any model, any story, regardless of if it's a book, a short story, a novella, a movie, a video game, a play, anything. I think you can actually use this as a 5-paragraph essay. So hopefully this helps you out. Of course, this is the most basic of basic story structures, so it's not going to be a hard and fast rule. Honestly, I really do encourage you to take the structure and pull apart why it works in certain ways and in which ways it really fails. Any rule, including this one, that you find about writing, about genre, about voice, literally anything that you learn, try it out and then try to break it. Because if you don't know how it works and can't put it back together, you'll never figure out why it works for yourself. And that's going to be much more valuable than if I tell you exactly how it works. Essentially, keep writing. Alright, I think that's it for this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button and the notification bell if you haven't already. And I hope that you found something useful. Leave a comment down below if you write with structure in mind or if you just sort of go with it. A lot of times we have just sort of an inherent understanding of structure because we're surrounded by it all the time, either by books or just television shows that we watch and movies and so on and so forth. So a lot of times people just don't keep that in mind, but I'd like to know your thoughts about structure and how it works for you in your writing. Alright, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!
Do you need to go? Then go?
No, was I in the chat?
No, you're not. And I can edit it out anyway, so.